Have you ever been in an argument that feels like you're on a merry-go-round? You say one thing, the person you're talking to hears something completely different, and you both just keep spinning. You get faster and faster, dizzier and dizzier, until you both feel frustrated, angry, and misunderstood. Nothing gets solved. In fact, you probably feel worse than when you started. What if those arguments, the ones with your partner, your kids, your boss, aren't actually about who's right and who's wrong? What if the real problem isn't the disagreement itself, but the language we use to handle it? What if there was a way to communicate that could cut through all the blame, the judgment, and anger and get right to the heart of what's really going on for you and for them? This is the promise of the book Nonviolent Communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. Rosenberg was a clinical psychologist who worked in some of the most conflict-ridden places imaginable, from war-torn countries to failing inner-city schools. And what he discovered was a profound yet simple truth. Most human conflict doesn't come from people being inherently bad, evil, or selfish. It comes from a tragic, roundabout way of expressing our own unmet needs. He noticed that the language we default to is often a language of judgment, criticism, and demands. He called this jackal language. It's quick to bite, to diagnose what's wrong with others. But he proposed another way of communicating, which he called giraffe language. Why a giraffe? Because the giraffe has the largest heart of any land animal, and its long neck gives it a unique perspective, allowing it to see things from a clearer, higher vantage point. This is the language of nonviolent communication, or NVC. And it's not about being passive or weak or just being nice. It's about being radically honest and deeply empathetic, all at the same time. NVC is built on a simple, four-step process that you can use both to express yourself honestly and to listen to others with deep compassion. The four steps are observations, feelings, needs, and requests. Let's start with the first step, observations. This sounds easy, but it's deceptively tricky. An observation is a pure statement of fact, without any judgment, evaluation, or diagnosis mixed in. Think of it like a camera recording what happened. For example, saying, "You're always so lazy," is an evaluation. It immediately puts the other person on the defensive. An observation would be, "I see that your dirty socks are on the living room floor." That's a fact. No one can argue with it. It's not an accusation, it's just what is. Rosenberg tells a story of working in a school where a principal called a student the most ignorant child I've ever laid eyes on. Rosenberg asked him to rephrase that as an observation. The principal struggled, but finally said, "When I ask him a question, he stares at the floor, opens his mouth, but no words come out." See the difference? The first is a judgment. The second is an observation that invites curiosity about why the child is behaving that way. Starting with the clean observation is the first key to preventing the other person from shutting down. The second step is feelings. After you've made an observation, you share the emotion that it sparks in you. And this means sharing a real, vulnerable feeling, not a thought disguised as a feeling. For example, saying, "I feel like you don't respect me," isn't actually a feeling. It's an interpretation of the other person's actions. A true feeling would be, "When I see the socks on the floor, I feel frustrated." Or, "I feel discouraged," or, "I feel sad." Naming the raw emotion, sad, angry, scared, joyful, is powerful because you're taking ownership of your emotional response. You're not saying, "You make me angry." You're saying, "When this happens, I feel angry." It's a subtle but crucial shift from blame to personal responsibility. This leads us to the third and arguably most important step: needs. According to Rosenberg, our feelings are messengers. They're like dashboard lights in a car, telling us that one of our fundamental universal human needs is either being met or not being met. These needs are things all humans share: the need for connection, for safety, for respect, for autonomy, for understanding, for support. So the frustration you feel about the socks isn't really about the socks. The socks are just the trigger. The feeling of frustration is pointing to an unmet need. So you might say, when I see the socks on the floor, I feel frustrated because I have a need for order and consideration in our shared living space. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about socks anymore. It's about a deep, legitimate, and universal human need. It's much harder to argue with someone's need for consideration than it is to argue about whether they are lazy. And that brings us to the fourth and final step: requests. Once you've observed a situation, identified your feeling, and connected it to a need, you can make a clear, positive, and concrete request for an action that would help meet that need. And crucially, it has to be a request, not a demand. A demand implies punishment if the person says no. A request honors their autonomy. They are free to say no. Continuing our example, you'd complete the thought: when I see your socks on the floor, I feel frustrated because I have a need for consideration in our shared living space. Would you be willing to put your socks in the laundry hamper? The request is specific, it's doable, and the question, would you be willing, leaves the door open for a real conversation, not a fight. So those are the 4 steps for expressing yourself: observations, feelings, needs, and requests. But the true magic of NVC is that this is also a framework for listening. This is the other half of the process: empathetic listening. Empathy in NVC isn't about agreeing with someone or feeling sorry for them. It's about giving them the space to be heard. It means listening for their observations, feelings, needs, and requests, even when they're screaming at you in pure jackal language. You listen past their words to guess what's alive in them. Rosenberg shares an incredible story about this. He was in a refugee camp in Palestine giving a talk about MVC. And as he spoke, a man in the audience stood up and yelled, "Murderer!" He then went on to list all the ways that America, Rosenberg's home country, had supplied weapons that had harmed his people. The room was tense. Rosenberg could have defended himself, argued, or shut down. Instead, he practiced empathetic listening. He tuned out the man's words and tried to hear his feelings and needs. He guessed, "Sir, are you feeling furious because you have a need to protect your community and see your people's resources used for life and not for war?" The man was stunned into silence. He had expected an argument, a defense. He hadn't expected to be understood. He took a breath and said, "Yes, that's exactly right." He then went on to speak for another 20 minutes, and with each point, Rosenberg just kept reflecting back the feelings and needs he was hearing. By the end, the very same man who had called him a murderer invited him to his home for a Ramadan dinner. He created connection out of what seemed like pure hatred simply by listening for the universal human need beneath the anger. And that's the fundamental shift this book offers. It asks us to stop playing the game of who's right and who's wrong and start playing the game of what's alive in us. It's a tool that can transform our relationships, not by teaching us to manipulate people into doing what we want, but by fostering a quality of connection where everyone's needs are valued and can be met peacefully. It's a practice that you can use with your partner over dinner, with your toddler during a tantrum, with your manager during a performance review, and maybe most importantly, with yourself when you're wrestling with your own internal critic. So here's a thought to leave you with, and something to try. The next time you find yourself in a difficult conversation, when you feel that flash of anger, that sting of defensiveness, or that wave of frustration, just pause for a second. Don't say a word. In that brief silence, before you react, silently ask yourself two simple questions. 1, what am I feeling right now? And 2, what is it that I truly need? Getting clear on the answers is the first step. Naming your feeling, is it disappointment, fear, loneliness, takes its power away. It stops you from being angry and allows you to